Sarah Mitchell had always been the type of woman who put herself first. At 38, she lived in a beautiful suburban house with her husband, David, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Jake. But there was another member of their household that Sarah barely acknowledged, 15-year-old Lily, David's niece who had been living with them for 3 years. Lily's story was heartbreaking. When she was 12, her parents died in a car accident during a winter storm. With no other relatives willing to take her in, David had stepped up without hesitation. He remembered his brother's little girl as a bright, cheerful child who loved to paint and read stories. But the tragedy had changed everything. Lily became quiet and withdrawn, carrying a sadness that seemed too heavy for someone so young. David had hoped that bringing Lily into their home would help her heal. He imagined family dinners, movie nights, and slowly watching his niece smile. Again. Sarah had agreed to take Lily in, but her agreement came with conditions that she never spoke aloud. In her mind, Lily was temporary, a burden they were stuck with until she turned 18 and could figure out her own life. From the moment Lily arrived, Sarah treated her differently than her own children. While Emma and Jake got new clothes, for school, Lily wore hand-me-downs from charity shops. When the family went out for dinner or to the movies, Sarah would often suggest that Lily stay home to catch up on homework or get some rest. During family photos, Sarah would position herself and her biological children in the center, leaving Lily on the edge or sometimes forgetting to include her altogether. The house had 4 bedrooms, but Sarah had converted one into her home office and craft room. Instead of giving Lily her own space, she was made to share the basement family room, sleeping on a fold-out couch while Emma and Jake each had their own rooms upstairs. When friends came over, Sarah would introduce Emma and Jake, proudly as my children, but would refer to Lily simply as David's niece who lives with us. David noticed the subtle cruelty, but often felt caught in the middle. He worked long hours as a construction manager and relied on Sarah to handle most of the household decisions. When he brought up concerns about how Lily was being treated, Sarah would become defensive, claiming she was doing her best with a difficult situation. She would remind him of all the sacrifices she was making, how much extra work it was to have another child in the house, and how Lily should be grateful for what they were providing. Lily, meanwhile, tried desperately to find her place in this family that felt more like strangers. She helped with household chores without being asked, maintained excellent grades at school, and never complained about the unequal treatment. She spent most of her time in the basement, reading books from the library or working on art projects. With supplies she bought with money from a part-time job she'd gotten at 14, cleaning tables at a local cafe after school. The other children at school knew Lily's story. And while some were kind to her, others saw her as different. The girl whose parents died, who lived with relatives who didn't really want her. Lily learned to eat lunch alone, to walk home by herself, and to find comfort in solitude. She wrote in a journal every night, pouring out her feelings to pages that would never judge her or make her feel unwelcome. Sarah's friends in the neighborhood knew about Lily's situation, and most of them praised Sarah for taking in that poor girl. This praise fed Sarah's ego and helped her justify her behavior. She would talk about the challenges of raising someone else's child, the extra expenses, and how difficult it was to bond with a teenager who had been through so much trauma. She painted herself as a martyr, sacrificing for a child who wasn't even hers. But behind closed doors, Sarah's resentment grew stronger each day. She saw Lily as a constant reminder that their family wasn't normal, that they had been saddled with someone else's responsibility. She began to blame Lily for things that went wrong around the house: missing items, higher grocery bills, extra laundry. She would make comments about how different things were before Lily came, even though the girl could hear every word. The worst part was how Sarah controlled information about Lily's own life. When letters came from lawyers handling her parents' estate, Sarah would open them and decide what Lily needed to know. When teachers called about Lily's exceptional performance at school, Sarah would take the message but forget to pass along the praise. She kept Lily isolated from any connection to her past life, claiming it was better for her to move forward rather than dwelling on sad memories. As Lily's 16th birthday approached, David suggested they have a celebration. Sarah agreed reluctantly, planning a small cake after dinner. But when Emma mentioned wanting a big, sweet 16 party the following year with all her friends, decorations, and a DJ, Sarah immediately began making elaborate plans. The contrast wasn't lost on Lily, who had learned not to expect the same treatment as Sarah's biological children. The house felt like a pressure cooker, with unspoken tensions building every day. Lily walked on eggshells, trying not to give Sarah any reason to complain about her. David worked longer hours to avoid the awkwardness at home. Emma and Jake learned to treat Lily as Sarah did, not cruelly, but with a distance that made it clear she wasn't really their sister. And Sarah continued to convince herself that she was a good person doing a difficult job, all while planning something that would change everything. What none of them knew was that Sarah had been secretly planning something that would expose her true character to everyone around her. Her actions would set in motion a chain of events that would reveal just how far her selfishness could go and how the universe has its own way of balancing the scales. The trip she was planning would become the catalyst for everything that followed, showing the community exactly what kind of person Sarah Mitchell really was beneath her carefully maintained exterior. The opportunity came when Sarah's college roommate Jennifer called with an invitation that made Sarah's heart race with excitement. Jennifer had married Well, a tech entrepreneur who had sold his company for millions, and they were planning a luxury cruise to the Caribbean. The ship would have spas, gourmet restaurants, and entertainment that Sarah had only dreamed about. Best of all, Jennifer was offering to pay for everything as a celebration of their friendship. "It's adults only," Jennifer explained over the phone. "No kids allowed. Just a week of pure relaxation and catching up on old times. You deserve this, Sarah. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" Sarah's mind immediately began racing with possibilities. She had been feeling trapped by her daily routine, overwhelmed by household responsibilities, and frustrated by what she saw as the burden of caring for Lily. This cruise represented everything she felt she was missing: luxury, freedom, and recognition of her worth as a person rather than just a mother and caretaker. The problem, of course, was the children. Emma and Jake could easily stay with Sarah's mother, who lived 2 hours away and loved spending time with her grandchildren. But what about Lily? Sarah's mother had made it clear years ago that while she would always babysit her biological grandchildren, she didn't consider Lily her responsibility. David's parents lived across the country and were too elderly to help. Sarah spent days thinking about solutions, but deep down, she had already made her decision. She would go on the cruise, and she would find a way to make it work without letting Lily's situation stop her. After all, she reasoned, she had been sacrificing for 3 years. Didn't she deserve 1 week of happiness? When David came home from work that Friday evening, Sarah had dinner ready and the children were doing homework. She waited until they were alone in the kitchen to bring up the cruise, presenting it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that they couldn't afford to pass up. "But what about the kids?" David asked immediately. "Emma and Jake can stay with my mother. She's already excited about having them for a week." Sarah began loading the dishwasher, avoiding eye contact as she prepared to deliver the plan she knew David wouldn't like. "What about Lily?" Sarah paused, her hands still holding a plate. "She'll be fine on her own. She's 16, David. Lots of kids her age babysit other people's children. She can handle taking care of herself for 1 week." David stared at his wife in disbelief. "You want to leave a 16-year-old girl alone in the house for an entire week? Sarah, that's not just irresponsible, it's wrong. She's family." "She's not my family," Sarah snapped, the words coming out before she could stop them. "She's your family, and I've been doing my part for 3 years. I need this break, David. I need to remember who I am, besides just a mother and a caretaker. The argument that followed was one of the worst they'd ever had. David couldn't believe that Sarah was seriously suggesting they abandon Lily, while Sarah felt that David didn't appreciate everything she had sacrificed. She brought up every difficulty, every extra expense, every moment of inconvenience that Lily's presence had caused. She talked about missed opportunities, social situations that were awkward because of their complicated family situation, and the constant stress of dealing with a traumatized teenager. I never wanted this responsibility, Sarah finally admitted. I agreed to help temporarily, but it's been 3 years, David. 3 years of my life revolving around someone else's child. When does it end? When do I get to live my life again? David was quiet for a long time, processing the depth of his wife's resentment. He had known Sarah wasn't comfortable with the arrangement, but he hadn't realized how deep her feelings ran. So what are you saying? That we should just abandon her? Send her to foster care? I'm saying that for 1 week, just 1 week, I want to pretend I have a normal life. I want to go on this cruise and feel like a person again instead of just a caretaker. Lily is 16. She can handle herself for a few days. David tried to argue, but Sarah had already made up her mind. She presented it as a fait accompli. The tickets were booked, her mother was expecting Emma and Jake, and Sarah was going whether David supported her or not. If he had a problem with Lily staying alone, he was welcome to skip the cruise himself and stay home with her. The manipulation worked exactly as Sarah had planned. David, exhausted from work and years of tension at home, finally gave in. He convinced himself that maybe Sarah was right, maybe they both needed this break, and maybe Lily was old enough to handle a week on her own. He agreed to the plan, though something deep in his gut told him it was wrong. Sarah immediately began planning for the trip with an enthusiasm that bordered on manic. She bought new clothes, scheduled spa appointments before they left, and talked endlessly about all the activities they would do on the cruise. She seemed to have completely pushed aside any concerns about leaving Lily alone. When Sarah finally told the children about the trip, she presented it as a wonderful opportunity for everyone. Emma and Jake were excited about staying with their grandmother, who always spoiled them with treats and late bedtimes. But when Lily heard that she would be staying home alone, her face went pale. "For the whole week?" Lily asked quietly. "It's not that long," Sarah replied dismissively. "You'll be fine. You're very mature for your age. Besides, you like having the house to yourself, right? You can watch whatever you want on TV and eat whatever you feel like cooking." Sarah spoke as if she was doing Lily a favor, giving her freedom and independence. But Lily understood the real message. She wasn't family enough to be included in the plans, and she wasn't worth finding proper care for. She was something to be managed, not someone to be cherished. David watched his niece's reaction and felt a stab of guilt, but Sarah was already moving ahead with the plans. She made lists of emergency contacts, left money for groceries, and gave Lily detailed instructions about taking care of the house. She seemed to think that being organized would somehow make abandoning a 16-year-old acceptable. What Sarah didn't realize was that her decision would soon become public knowledge, and the community that had once praised her for taking in that poor girl would see her true character. The trip she was so excited about would become the beginning of her downfall, as word spread about what she had done and people began to see past her carefully constructed image of martyrdom. The day of departure arrived with Sarah practically glowing with excitement. She had packed her finest clothes, gotten her hair and nails done, and spent the morning taking selfies in her cruise outfits to post on social media. Emma and Jake had already been dropped off at their grandmother's house the night before, amid hugs and promises of daily phone calls. Lily watched from the kitchen window as Sarah loaded her suitcases into the car. David was moving slowly, checking and rechecking the emergency information list, still clearly uncomfortable with leaving his niece alone. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to have completely compartmentalized her decision, acting as if leaving a 16-year-old alone for a week was perfectly normal. "Remember," Sarah called out as she did a final check of her purse. "Don't have any friends over, don't answer the door unless it's someone you know, and call if there's an emergency. The neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, has our cruise information if Ma." "You absolutely need to reach us, but try to handle things yourself first." The way Sarah spoke made it clear she hoped not to be bothered at all. This was her vacation, her escape from responsibility, and she didn't want any reminders of the life she was temporarily leaving behind. David hugged Lily goodbye, whispering an apology she pretended not to hear. "We'll call you," he promised, though they both knew the international phone rates would make that expensive and inconvenient. As the car pulled out of the driveway, Lily stood in the empty house and felt the weight of abandonment settle on her shoulders like a familiar blanket. She had been alone before. Emotionally, she had been alone for 3 years. But this was different. This was official. This was Sarah making it clear that Lily's comfort and safety were less important than Sarah's desire for a vacation. The first day passed quietly. Lily went to school as usual, came home, did her homework, and made herself a simple dinner. She called David's cell phone that evening, but it went straight to voicemail. They were probably already on the ship and out of range. She left a brief message saying she was fine and went to bed early, but by the second day, word was beginning to spread through the community about what Sarah had done. It started with Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had been given the emergency contact information. Mrs. Patterson had been friendly with the Mitchell family for years and had always felt sorry for Lily. When she realized that the girl was alone in the house while the family went on vacation, she was shocked. "They left that child by herself," Mrs. Patterson said to her daughter during their daily phone call, "for a whole week? On some fancy cruise while she stays home alone?" Mrs. Patterson's daughter worked at the school district office and knew Lily's tragic story. She was appalled that adults who had taken responsibility for an orphaned child would abandon her for a vacation. She mentioned it to her co-workers, who mentioned it to their friends, and soon the story was spreading through the small community like wildfire. The reaction was swift and unanimous. People were disgusted. These were the same neighbors who had praised Sarah for years for her charity in taking in David's orphaned niece. They had admired what they thought was her generosity and sacrifice. Now they were seeing the truth, that Sarah had never seen Lily as family, but as a burden to be managed. At the high school, Lily's teachers began to notice that she seemed even more withdrawn than usual. When the art teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, asked if everything was okay at home, Lily just shrugged and said her aunt and uncle were traveling. But Ms. Rodriguez had heard the rumors circulating among the staff, and she was concerned enough to make some phone calls. Ms. Rodriguez had always been impressed by Lily's talent and resilience. Despite everything the girl had been through, she maintained excellent grades and created beautiful artwork that often reflected deep emotional understanding beyond her years. Ms. Rodriguez had tried several times to reach out to Sarah about Lily's potential, suggesting art scholarships and advanced placement opportunities, but Sarah had always seemed disinterested, brushing off the conversations with comments about how they were just trying to get through each day. Now, Ms. Rodriguez understood why Sarah had seemed so disconnected from Lily's achievements. Sarah had never seen Lily as someone with a future worth investing in. She had seen her as a temporary inconvenience that she was counting down the days until she could get rid of. Meanwhile, on the cruise ship, Sarah was having the time of her life. She posted constant updates on social media, photos of gourmet meals, sunset views from the deck, spa treatments, and herself in elegant evening wear. She tagged every location and used hashtags like "living my best life, not or deserved it," "finally time for me." The posts painted a picture of a woman celebrating her freedom and luxury. What Sarah didn't realize was that people back home were seeing these posts with growing disgust. Every photo of her enjoying champagne and 5-star dining was a reminder that she had left a 16-year-old orphan alone at home. The contrast between Sarah's indulgence and Lily's abandonment was stark and ugly. Jennifer, Sarah's college friend, was initially delighted to see Sarah enjoying herself so thoroughly. But when Jennifer innocently asked about Sarah's children during dinner one night, Sarah's response shocked her. "Emma and Jake are with my mother-in-law having a blast, and David's niece is old enough to take care of herself for a week. Honestly, it's probably good for her to have some independence." "Wait," Jennifer said slowly. "You left a 16-year-old alone for a week?" "She's very mature," Sarah said defensively, suddenly realizing that her friend's expression had changed. "And she's not really my responsibility anyway. She's David's family." Jennifer, who had 2 teenage children of her own, was horrified. She couldn't imagine leaving any 16-year-old alone for a week, much less one who had already lost her parents and was dealing with trauma. The conversation became tense, with Jennifer asking pointed questions about why they hadn't found proper care for Lily. "I've been taking care of her for 3 years, Sarah snapped. "I deserve 1 week to myself." The friendship that had been renewed on this cruise was quickly souring as Jennifer realized what kind of person Sarah had become. Other passengers at their dinner table had overheard the conversation, and word began to spread even on the ship about the woman who had abandoned her orphaned niece for a vacation. Back at home, the community response was growing stronger. Parents, who had children in Lily's classes, began organizing. They couldn't believe that a child who had already lost so much was being treated this way by the very people who were supposed to protect her. The story had touched a nerve in the community, bringing out protective instincts and moral outrage that Sarah had never anticipated. What had started as Sarah's dream vacation was about to become the catalyst for consequences she never could have imagined. The community that had once praised her was turning against her, and the girl she had tried to ignore was about to become the center of a support network that would change everything. By the 3rd day of the cruise, the situation back home had escalated beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. What started as neighborhood gossip had become a community movement, with people organizing to support Lily and express their outrage at how she had been treated. Mrs. Patterson had taken it upon herself to check on Lily daily, bringing over home-cooked meals and making sure the teenager had everything she needed. But Mrs. Patterson was elderly and felt the situation required more intervention. She contacted the school guidance counselor, who immediately began making calls to understand the full situation. The guidance counselor, Mr. Thompson, had been working with traumatized children for over 20 years. He had watched Lily navigate her grief with remarkable strength, always impressed by her resilience and maturity. But when he learned that she had been left alone while her guardians went on vacation, he was not only concerned for her immediate safety, but furious at the emotional damage this abandonment would cause. Mr. Thompson contacted Child Protective Services, not because he wanted to remove Lily from her home, but because he believed the situation needed official documentation. A caseworker came to interview Lily, who tried to downplay the situation, insisting she was fine and could take care of herself. But the caseworker, Maria Santos, had seen enough neglect cases to recognize the signs of emotional abandonment. Lily's living situation in the basement, the obvious differences in how she was treated compared to the biological children, and now being left alone for a week painted a clear picture of a child who was being tolerated rather than loved. "Lily," Maria said gently during their interview, "you know this isn't normal, right? Families don't leave 16-year-olds alone for a week to go on vacation. Even if they could legally do it, caring families don't want to do it." For the first time in years, Lily allowed herself to acknowledge what she had always known, but never said aloud. She wasn't really part of this family. She was a burden they were counting down the days to be rid of. The tears that followed were years of suppressed hurt and loneliness finally being released. Meanwhile, the community response was growing stronger each day. Parents from Lily's school had created a group chat to coordinate support. They organized meal deliveries, offered to include Lily in family activities, and began discussing longer-term solutions to ensure she felt welcomed and valued. Ms. Rodriguez, the art teacher, had reached out to several colleges about scholarship opportunities for Lily. She had been trying to do this for months, but Sarah had always deflected conversations about Lily's future. Now, with Sarah gone and the community rally around Lily, Ms. Rodriguez was free to advocate properly for her talented student. The local newspaper got wind of the story, and while they didn't publish names due to Lily's age, they ran a piece about community members supporting a local teenager whose guardians had left her alone during a family vacation. The article praised the neighbors and teachers who had stepped up, but the implications about the guardian's character were clear to anyone who knew the situation. On the cruise ship, Sarah remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing back home. She was too busy enjoying spa treatments, fine dining, and entertainment to check her social media comments or voicemails. The few times David suggested they should call home to check on Lily, Sarah dismissed his concerns. "She's fine, David. Stop worrying. This is our time to relax and reconnect." Sarah raised her champagne glass toward the sunset, posing for another photo that would soon become evidence of her callousness. But Jennifer, Sarah's college friend who had organized the trip, was having serious second thoughts about her renewed friendship. The conversation about Lily had bothered Jennifer so much that she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had tried to imagine leaving her own 16-year-old daughter alone for a week and felt sick at the thought. During a spa day, Jennifer brought up the subject again. "Sarah, I keep thinking about your niece. Are you sure she's okay being alone? Maybe we should call to check on her." Sarah's expression hardened. "Why does everyone keep acting like I'm some terrible person? Lily is not my daughter. I've been taking care of someone else's child for 3 years, and I deserve 1 week of peace. She's 16, not 6. She can handle a few days alone." "But, Sarah, she's an orphan. She's already lost her parents. How must it feel to be left behind while the family goes on vacation?" "She's lucky we took her in at all," Sarah snapped. "Most people wouldn't have made the sacrifices I've made. I've given up 3 years of my life for that girl." Jennifer realized that Sarah genuinely didn't understand how cruel her actions were. In Sarah's mind, she had been playing the role of a martyr for years, and this vacation was her reward. She couldn't see past her own sense of entitlement to recognize the damage she was causing to a child who had already suffered tremendous loss. The friendship between Jennifer and Sarah effectively ended that day. Jennifer spent the rest of the cruise avoiding Sarah when possible and feeling ashamed that she had facilitated this trip that had allowed such callous behavior. Back home, the support network around Lily was solidifying into something permanent. Several families had offered to have Lily stay with them instead of returning to the basement room when the Mitchells came home. The high school principal had gotten involved, ensuring that Lily knew she had advocates and that her academic achievements were being recognized with scholarship opportunities. Most importantly, people were documenting everything. The neighbors took photos of Lily eating alone, of the basement where she lived, of the contrast between her living situation and that of the biological children. Teachers compiled records of Sarah's disinterest in Lily's achievements and her failure to attend school events or parent conferences. All of this evidence was being forwarded to Maria Santos, the CPS caseworker, who was building a comprehensive file about Lily's living situation. While removal from the home wasn't necessarily the goal, ensuring that Lily had proper support and that the Mitchells understood their legal and moral obligations definitely was. The community had also started a fund for Lily's college expenses and immediate needs. Local businesses contributed, neighbors donated, and even people who didn't know Lily personally but had heard her story wanted to help. The fund grew quickly, reaching several $1,000s within just a few days. What Sarah didn't realize was that her decision to abandon Lily for a luxury vacation had inadvertently given Lily something she had never had before, a community of people who truly cared about her welfare. The very action that was meant to show Lily her place in Sarah's priorities had instead revealed Sarah's character to everyone who mattered. When the Mitchells returned from their cruise, they would find that everything had changed. The secret, resentment and quiet neglect that had defined their household for 3 years was now public knowledge, and the community had chosen sides. Sarah's reputation as a selfless woman who had taken in an orphaned child was destroyed, replaced by the truth of who she really was. The cruise ship docked on Saturday morning, and Sarah was practically bouncing with residual excitement from her week of luxury. She had taken hundreds of photos, collected souvenirs, and felt completely refreshed from what she considered the best week of her life. David was quieter, having spent much of the cruise feeling guilty about leaving Lily alone. But he had been swept up in Sarah's enthusiasm and convinced himself that everything would be fine. As they waited for their luggage, Sarah scrolled through her phone, catching up on the messages and notifications that had accumulated while they were at sea. Her smile faded quickly as she began to see the comments on her social media posts. Instead of the likes and compliments she expected, there were dozens of critical comments. How could you leave a 16-year-old alone while you lived it up? On a cruise? That poor girl deserves so much better than you. Disgusting behavior from someone who pretends to be a good person. Child abandonment isn't a vacation plan. Sarah's hands began shaking as she scrolled through comment after comment, expressing disgust and disappointment. People she had considered friends were publicly criticizing her decision. Neighbors, co-workers, and even distant acquaintances were sharing their opinions about her parenting choices. "David," she whispered urgently, showing him the phone. "Look at this. People are acting like we committed some crime by going on vacation." David read the comments with growing horror. He had been uncomfortable with leaving Lily alone, but Sarah had convinced him it would be fine. Now he was seeing their decision through the eyes of their community, and he realized how terrible it looked. More importantly, he realized how terrible it actually was. The drive home was tense and silent. Sarah alternated between rage at the unfair criticism and panic about what they would find when they returned. David was processing the full weight of what they had done and dreading facing his niece after abandoning her for a week. When they pulled into their driveway, they immediately noticed Mrs. Patterson working in her garden. The elderly neighbor looked up and gave them a cold stare that spoke volumes. Sarah waved tentatively, but Mrs. Patterson turned her back and went inside her house without acknowledgement. Inside their own home, they found Lily in the kitchen, quietly eating lunch and reading a book. She looked up when they entered, and Sarah was struck by how composed and mature the girl appeared. For just a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of relief that everything seemed normal. "Hi," Lily said simply. "How was your trip?" "It was wonderful," Sarah began, launching into her prepared explanation about how the vacation had been necessary and beneficial for everyone. But as she spoke, she noticed that Lily wasn't really listening. The girl was nodding politely but seemed detached, as if Sarah's words didn't really matter anymore. David hugged his niece and asked if everything had been okay while they were gone. Lily assured him that she had been fine, that neighbors had checked on her, and that she had kept up with school and taken care of the house. She was calm and responsible, which somehow made David feel worse about what they had done. What Sarah and David didn't immediately realize was that the past week had fundamentally changed Lily's relationship with their family and with the community. The girl who had spent 3 years trying desperately to earn acceptance and love had finally understood that she would never get those things from Sarah. But more importantly, she had discovered that there were other people who valued and cared about her. The phone began ringing within hours of their return. The first call was from the school guidance counselor, requesting a meeting to discuss Lily's academic achievements and scholarship opportunities. Sarah was surprised to learn about opportunities she had never been told about, programs that Ms. Rodriguez and other teachers had tried to discuss with her for months. Then came a call from Maria Santos, the CPS caseworker, requesting a home visit to follow up on concerns that had been raised during the Mitchells' absence. Sarah was shocked to learn that Child Protective Services had been involved at all, and her first instinct was to blame Lily for causing trouble. "What did you tell them?" Sarah demanded after hanging up the phone. "Why are social workers getting involved in our family business?" Lily looked at her calmly. "I didn't call anyone, Sarah. People noticed that I was here alone and were concerned. Mrs. Patterson, my teachers, neighbors, they all care about my well-being. I guess that surprised some people since they realized not everyone in this house feels the same way." The quiet strength in Lily's voice caught Sarah off guard. This wasn't the meek, grateful girl who had been tiptoeing around their house for 3 years. Something had changed while they were gone, and Sarah sensed that she was no longer in control of the narrative about their family situation. Over the next few days, the full scope of the community response became clear. Families from Lily's school had organized a support network. Local businesses had contributed to a college fund that had grown to over $10,000. Teachers had compiled a portfolio of Lily's artwork and academic achievements to help with scholarship applications. The newspaper had run a follow-up story about community support for local youth, with clear references to Lily's situation. Most devastatingly for Sarah, her own reputation in the community was destroyed. Women who had once praised her for taking in David's orphaned niece now crossed the street to avoid talking to her. Parents at school events whispered when she walked by. Her book club asked her not to come back. Even her hairdresser made a comment about people who abandon children for vacations. Sarah couldn't understand how her 1 week of deserved happiness had turned into this nightmare. In her mind, she had been a martyr for 3 years, sacrificing her own desires to care for someone else's child. Now she was being treated like a villain for taking 1 vacation. But the community saw something different. They saw a woman who had been pretending to be charitable while actually resenting and neglecting a vulnerable child. They saw someone who had taken praise for her supposed generosity while secretly counting down the days until she could get rid of her responsibility. David was struggling with his own guilt and shame. His co-workers had heard about the situation, and several had made comments about how they could never leave their children alone for a week, much less a child who had already lost her parents. David realized that he had allowed his wife's resentment to override his own moral compass, and he was ashamed of his weakness. The CPS home visit was scheduled for the following week, and Sarah spent days frantically trying to prepare. She bought new sheets for Lily's basement space, cleaned obsessively, and tried to coach everyone on what to say. But Lily had already spoken honestly with Maria Santos, and the damage was done. What Sarah didn't realize was that the community support network that had formed around Lily wasn't temporary. These people had seen a need and filled it, and they weren't going to disappear just because the Mitchells had returned from vacation. They had made a commitment to this remarkable young woman who had shown such grace and strength in the face of abandonment. The week that was supposed to be Sarah's reward for years of sacrifice had instead become the catalyst for her complete social downfall and the beginning of Lily's real life as a valued member of a community that truly cared about her future. 3 months after the cruise, Sarah's life had completely unraveled in ways she never could have imagined. The CPS investigation had concluded with mandated family counseling and regular check-ins, but the real consequences came from the community itself. Sarah had become a social pariah, facing the kind of isolation she had once inflicted on Lily. The family counseling sessions were particularly difficult for Sarah because they forced her to confront truths she had spent years avoiding. Dr. Martinez, their therapist, didn't mince words about the emotional damage that had been done to Lily through years of subtle rejection and the ultimate abandonment of the cruise week. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez said during one particularly intense session, "you've spent 3 years treating Lily as a temporary inconvenience rather than a family member. Children who have lost their parents are especially vulnerable to feeling unwanted. Your actions have reinforced her deepest fears about being a burden. Sarah tried to defend herself, talking about all the sacrifices she had made and how difficult it had been to adjust to having another child in the house. But Dr. Martinez pointed out that Lily had sacrificed far more: her childhood, her sense of security, and her belief that she deserved love and acceptance. The cruise wasn't just about leaving her alone, the therapist explained. It was about making it clear that she wasn't worth finding proper care for. It was about prioritizing your wants over her basic emotional needs, and doing it so publicly sent a message to the entire community about how you really felt about this child. David was forced to confront his own role in enabling Sarah's behavior. He had seen the inequality in their home, but had chosen the path of least resistance rather than standing up for his niece. His guilt was eating him alive, especially as he watched Lily blossom under the attention and support of her new community network. Meanwhile, Lily's life had transformed in remarkable ways. The college fund that had started during the cruise week had grown to over $30,000, enough to cover her full tuition at several state universities. Local businesses had offered her internships and part-time jobs. Most importantly, she had been invited to live with the Rodriguez family during her senior year of high school. Ms. Rodriguez and her husband had 2 college-age children and had always regretted not having more kids. When they learned about Lily's situation, they offered her not just a place to stay, but a real family environment where her achievements were celebrated and her future was prioritized. The offer came with no conditions and no expiration date. Lily would be welcomed as a daughter, not a guest. The decision to move out was difficult for Lily, not because she wanted to stay with the Mitchells, but because she felt guilty about leaving David. Despite everything, she knew her uncle loved her and was trapped in a difficult situation with his wife. "I don't blame you," David told her the night before she moved out. "I should have protected you better. I should have stood up to Sarah years ago. I'm proud of the woman you're becoming, and I'm sorry I failed you when you needed me most." Lily hugged her uncle, forgiving him in a way that made David cry. She understood that he was weak, rather than cruel, caught between loyalty to his wife and love for his niece. But she also understood that she deserved better than being someone's burden or source of family conflict. The contrast between Lily's new life and Sarah's downfall was stark and painful. While Lily thrived in a home where she was truly wanted, Sarah faced the consequences of her choices every day. Her friendship circles had dissolved, her reputation was destroyed, and even her own children began to see her differently. Emma and Jake had heard the comments at school about their mother abandoning their cousin. They began to understand that the way Lily had been treated in their home wasn't normal or acceptable. Emma, now 13, started asking uncomfortable questions about why Lily had lived in the basement while she had her own room, why Lily was never included in family photos, and why their mother had seemed to dislike her so much. "Mom," Emma asked one evening, "did you really hate Lily?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She tried to explain that she hadn't hated Lily, that the situation had just been difficult and complicated. But Emma's next question was even harder to answer. "If something happened to me and Dad and I had to live with relatives, would I want them to treat me the way you treated Lily?" Sarah couldn't answer because they both knew the truth. No child would want to be treated as an unwelcome burden, relegated to a basement room, excluded from family activities, and ultimately abandoned for a vacation. The realization that her own children were ashamed of her behavior was perhaps the most devastating consequence of all. The community continued to rally around Lily throughout her senior year. Her artwork was featured in a local gallery, with proceeds going to a scholarship fund for other orphaned children. She was accepted to several universities with full scholarships, and her graduation was attended by dozens of community members who had supported her journey. Sarah watched the graduation from the back of the auditorium, seeing the young woman Lily had become despite, not because of, her influence. Lily gave a speech about resilience, community support, and finding family in unexpected places. She thanked specific teachers, neighbors, and the Rodriguez family for showing her what real love and acceptance looked like. David was mentioned in her speech with gratitude for giving her a safe place to land after her parents died, but Sarah was notably absent from any acknowledgments. The omission was not cruel or vindictive. Lily had simply learned to focus on the people who had truly contributed to her growth and happiness. As Lily left for college the following fall, Sarah remained in the community that had rejected her, living with the daily reminders of her choices. The neighbors who had once praised her now avoided her. The women who had admired her charity now understood it had been reluctant tolerance at best. The cruise that was supposed to be Sarah's reward for years of sacrifice had instead become the catalyst for losing everything she thought she valued: her reputation, her social standing, and ultimately her family's respect. She had gotten exactly what she claimed to want: freedom from the responsibility of caring for Lily. But the cost had been far higher than she ever imagined. Lily, meanwhile, was thriving in college, surrounded by friends who valued her for who she was rather than tolerating her as an obligation. She stayed in touch with David and even maintained a polite relationship with Sarah, but she had learned to build her life around people who truly loved and supported her. The community had taught both women an important lesson about karma. Cruelty and selfishness eventually come back to punish those who practice them, while kindness and resilience attract genuine love and support. Sarah's attempt to escape her responsibilities had ended up defining her as someone who abandoned vulnerable children for personal pleasure. Lily's grace in handling that abandonment had revealed her strength and attracted a lifetime of genuine relationships. In the end, the week-long cruise had changed everything, but not in the way Sarah had expected. Instead of being her escape from a difficult situation, it had become the moment when her true character was revealed to everyone who mattered. And instead of being abandoned and forgotten, Lily had found her real family among people who chose to love her without conditions or expiration dates.